Hello, people. Well, could some kind soul raise their hand just so I know that this recording is actually going? You can all can hear me. Oh, thank you, Laura. And I would just assess based on the names I'm seeing up here. We have people from all over the world. It is too bad that we don't have time to just chat about stuff in general, but we got to talk about adrenal fatigue. So I'm Dr. Dan Kalish, super excited to be doing this presentation. This is a class that I teach all the time in my mentorship program, which usually people pay ridiculously large amounts of money to take, and now I'm just teaching it for free. And why, you may ask, is Dan teaching his best stuff for free? Because I have so much new content in the mentorship that what used to be like the crown jewels of the program are now like, oh well, adrenal programs. We got so much new stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things that are going on around the Kalish Institute. Then we're going to jump into some program protocol design, things that you can actually use for real, Okay, so I'm going to give you a little update. We have a class that's starting in about a month. And I have built in the mentorship, within the 1 year mentorship, this whole new fundamentals of functional medicine course. I spent months and months and months and months and months on this thing. So it is and I'm going to cover a little bit about it today. It's basically, the fundamentals of patient interaction and program design, how you actually get people to take stuff, how you design programs. And what I found after all these years of teaching the full year mentorship is that some docs just never got this. I got this information sitting at the feet of the master, Dr. Glenn Frieder, and just watching him work for 4 or 5 years. And it's not intuitively obvious how to figure all this stuff out. So anyways, I've built up a whole new section of the mentorship, and it's the best work I've ever done. If you guys have been thinking about doing the class for a while, we didn't change the price at all. You get this whole new, $3,000 section of the course as part of the 1 year class. The mentorship starts April 24th. You get $1,000 off if you sign up using this promo code here. You want to talk to someone on my team about it, please do, because it is bigger and badder than ever. In addition to this whole ridiculous fundamentals class that I put together as part of the mentorship, I've also been working with Dr. Richard Lord for the last 2 years. And for those of you that don't know Richard, not familiar with his work, he was the original scientist that developed organic acids testing. He's the scientist that developed the GI effects test. Really probably the most prominent scientist in terms of lab design and lab analytics in our entire industry. And Richard's been working with me for 2 years now to really up my skill level in terms of how to interpret and do these tests as well. So I'm pretty excited about that connection. And so, whereas the class for the year-long class for 12 years was really kind of the world about Dan and how I do things. Now I'm really been able to incorporate Dr. Lord's materials into the class, and it's brought it to this whole other level of clinical expertise. And anyways, it's a golden era right now for me professionally, and I'm super excited about that. So one of the reasons why I'm teaching this class is I have all of Dr. Lord's new material, and I figure, well, I can give away some of my precious stuff from the past, and that's kind of what tonight is all about. And I want to start off by talking a little bit about misunderstandings. We'll look a lot at labs tonight, and probably the most important thing is, who not to do this stuff with. So the adrenal programs work extremely well with people who have an adrenal problem. But, what you want to rule out are people who have major mitochondrial problems are not going to respond very well to an adrenal program. And people who have a primary thyroid problem will get some benefit, but not that great. So if you're convinced the patient's main life problem is thyroid, then adrenal protocols help a little bit, but they're not life-changing. And similarly, if you've identified based on the labs that the patient's main problem is mitochondrial in origin, then I wouldn't encourage you to pursue these kind of programs either. But for the right patient at the right time, this can be really life-changing work. And I just stacked the PowerPoint deck tonight with a ton of slides that we're not going to really talk about, just in case you all want to review this later, because we usually post there'll be a PDF somewhere of the slides that you can download. But I want to, because I want tonight focus mostly on program design. But anyways, when I'm talking about the adrenals, we're talking about the adrenals in the context of all these different body systems here. Okay, so we've got the stress-related problems, GI-related issues, toxin-related problems, and I'm always trying to explain this in terms of models, and neuroendocrine, GI, and detox as a model, right? But then when you want to go to that next level of program design, you want to start to think about, well, how am I going to set up a program that a patient can actually do? And it's got to be, number one, in order for us to survive on the streets of functional medicine land, as I have for all these years, is you got to like be clinically impactful. Like you have to change people's lives. If they come to see you and 6 months later they're like, they don't really feel like their life has changed, then they're not going to refer patients and we'll be out on the street, not able to practice. So number one, you have to generate programs that are life-changing, but at the same time, they have to be realistic and patients have to, have to be able to do them. So you can't give everybody everything that you want. You have to start to think about program setup. What are the goals that you have? What are the goals that the patient has? What are the patient needs? Are they somebody who's going to want to take a lot of stuff or just a few things? And when I show you the adrenal programs, I'll show you how I prioritize all that. There are some people like me who, the more I spend on something, the better I feel it is. So if I'm at a nice restaurant and there's a $178 bottle of wine, and I order that bottle of wine, I'm thinking this is going to be a really good bottle of wine. And if I order a $17 bottle of wine, I'm thinking this wine is probably not going to be that great. In my mind, the psychology is, hey, if I spend more, it's going to have to be better. Okay, not everybody thinks like that. Some people are the opposite. Some people actually feel better about themselves and the world in general if they spend less money on themselves. Okay, usually that doesn't pan out so well because most things that are cheaper aren't as good quality, right? So certainly when it comes to supplements, you want to be really careful about people who are cost conscious and reduce their program down to like 2 key products that are going to work rather than giving them 5 cheap things that aren't going to work. Okay, so you can have a clinically impactful program that's cheap. You can have a clinically impactful program that's expensive. Either way, you can make it work. Okay, so you just need to assess who you're talking to. Do they want a lot of supplements or just a few? Do they want changes to happen fast? Now, my assumption is that everyone wants to have fast changes, but you ask people, some people get freaked out by changes that are too fast. So you may have patients that actually want gradual changes. Okay? So just make sure that you check in with the person so you know as you're designing their adrenal program, what are the good things that you want to set up for them. Okay? And then, of course, there's a report of findings and sequencing. In terms of how do we sequence all this, well, I always lead off with the adrenal or neuroendocrine programs. So that would be the first step. Adrenal, thyroid, sex hormones, neuroendocrine, that also would include neurotransmitter programs, because these programs, for a variety of reasons, are nice to lead off with. They make people feel better. And there's reasons why you want to control for inflammation and all this other stuff. That's not a bad place to start. So just think about, as you're designing programs, take it from the patient's perspective so that you're, well aware of what they're doing. And I think the most common mistakes that I made in my early years were that I would just write out every supplement that I thought they needed and not check in with them about what was realistic. And again, you can have a life-changing program with 2 or 3 products. They don't have to spend a lot. However, some people who want things to go quickly and who feel better if they spend more on something will be happier, believe it or not, if they buy more stuff from you. So you don't want to hold back on those people because it'll interfere with the healing process. It's not about us making more money. It's about us, figuring out how to design a program that's going to be life-changing. So you want to include their perspective, their pains, their gains, their life goals. Because if we get a benefit from the program, but it's not what the patient wanted, then, not everybody's going to be happy about that. And then under lifestyle factors, I think the most important thing I can say about lifestyle is that every supplement that I give and every program that I recommend is tied into a lifestyle change. Okay, so by that I mean, you think about it, you're doing an adrenal stress program and the person's working, 120 hours a week and they're in a bad marriage and their spouse is an alcohol abuser and, violent. They're clearly, not going to get better, right? So we have to tie every supplement program we use into lifestyle changes and try to, emphasize that the areas of stress that a patient can change need to be changed as part of the program. And it could be something as simple as blood sugar control, where you just set up the adrenal program and you let them know, hey, part of this program is related to blood sugar control, and the supplements aren't going to work very well unless we start to get you eating 3 meals a day and those kinds of things. So always tying the program lifestyle changes into the supplement protocols. That's just the basic thing that we want to do. And then what I want to talk about next is designing supplement programs that people can actually do and that are going to work, and thinking about how that ties in to products and symptoms and conditions and all the things that they're struggling with, right? And here's all the common misunderstandings that we want to avoid. And I see these every day in practice from patients coming in from other doctors. They're on too many programs or too many supplements. That doesn't work. There's no follow-up. The dosing, oh man, I see this one more than anything. The dosing is too low. So these are related. They're on tons of different supplements, but none of the individual supplements are at a therapeutic dose. I can't tell you how often I see that. Let me say that again, because this is a mistake that we're all making. They're on a ton of different supplements, but the dosing of everything is too low, so nothing's happening. Just horrible, horrible mistakes that people make that are just so easy to avoid if we're thinking about it. And then the things that we want to understand, the ideas of program design, how to sequence things, all these kind of basics that we think about when we're looking at programs. So let me we talked about this already. Again, I put a bunch of slides in here you guys can reference later, but I want to start with programs here. They're more just like reference slides for you. Patient comes in with symptoms. We're looking at body systems, in this case, adrenals, and then we're wondering what the underlying cause is. And so the adrenal hormones themselves are never an underlying cause, unless there's a rare case of an adrenal tumor or something like that. But how often do you see that? The adrenal problems are a reaction to various forms of stress. So we don't want to ever blame the adrenals per se. There could be emotional, spiritual stress, it could be dietary stress, it could be gluten, GI infections, toxins. Any of these variables will push the adrenals over the edge. So again, the adrenals are rarely an underlying cause. They're going to be, in the scheme of how I look at things here, pretty far down the line, right? There's an underlying cause, there's damage that occurs, and then eventually when these body systems starts to fail, and then people have symptoms. So we're kind of in this box tonight, dealing with correcting the body systems. So what does that mean? That means that an adrenal program by itself is most likely not going to address the underlying cause of the problem. An adrenal program in and of itself is likely not going to address the underlying cause of the problem. If they're still in a bad marriage, if they're still having a bad diet, if they still have toxins, then the adrenal program's not going to correct that. So you may say, well, Dan, that makes no sense. Why are you doing it first then? Well, let me skip back here a few slides. Because stress is a leading factor in triggering this whole cascade of problems. And so we can get a huge benefit by treating the stress response early. But don't let it fool you. You still need to deal with the underlying cause issues, which could be gut related or toxin related or emotional related or wherever it may be. Okay? But just treating the adrenal glands by themselves is really rarely going to solve the complete problem. And then what are the three major sources of stress for the adrenals? Emotional, dietary, and inflammatory. We talk about that for days. It took me years to come up with this. But when people ask, well, why would I want to work on my adrenals? Why would they be a problem in the first place? Well, you could be under emotional, dietary, or inflammatory stress, and any of those will cause a problem. And then let's start to look at programs real quick here. I'm not wasting any time. And that's it. We're just getting all the negative stuff out of the way, just to clear the air here, right? So be careful. You don't need to use high dosages. Just tiny little dosages are fine, okay, when we're talking about these programs. Make sure that what you're doing is based on testing. Use the DHEA and pregnenolone together, and don't get too freaked out about things you read on the internet because half of it's not true. All right, so let me just show you, let's just cut to the chase here. I'm going to show you what a basic program looks like, and then I'll show you how you can manipulate the dosages. So the two lead-off products are going to be DHEA, and I like to use it in liquid. You can also get it in pills, liquid or pills, and pregnenolone. Again, I prefer the liquids, but you can also get it in pills. So the various adrenal labs will tell you how much DHEA and how much pregnenolone. We're assuming that you're aware of all the don't do it's in here. Like if the person has estrogen-related breast cancer, don't use DHEA. If the person has prostate-related problems, you may not want to use DHEA. If they're under the age of 16 years old, you for sure don't want to use any DHEA. So, we're assuming you guys have some basic knowledge about when it's safe to use these things. But by and large, for most of the adults that we work with, this can be a really fantastic combination. And then along with that, some kind of blood sugar support product. Every company has a gazillion of those. You can, if you really want to get into this, add in some adaptogenic herbs. And these are obvious things that probably most of you use already. You can use some extra vitamin C because the adrenals use extra, burn through a lot of vitamin C, and then some kind of a multi. So my complete adrenal program would include these 6 products: DHEA, preg, blood sugar support, herbal support, vitamin C, and some kind of a multi-pack. And then the DHEA and pregnenolone dosing, we're going to talk about tonight, about how you adjust that up or down based on the lab, because that's kind of like the secret sauce part. Again, assuming that you've cleared the person, they're okay to take these hormones, you feel comfortable doing that based on their history and whatever, and that you're pretty sure they have an adrenal problem based on the lab. Obviously, if they don't have an adrenal problem, we wouldn't be doing this. So I'm going to skip around a little bit on the slides. We'll come back, but I'm going to skip forward to the good part here so you guys can see. Again, I have 10 more slides, 10 times the slides in here that we have time for. I'm assuming most of you kind of know all the basics already, but let's look at the actual protocol part, and then we can kind of fill in the dots if you don't know some of these other things. So there's 3 stages of adrenal exhaustion. Simply put, there's high cortisol states. Cortisol is high. There's cortisol when it's dropping, and there's cortisol when it's low. And we vary the amount of DHEA and pregnenolone based on what the stage is. And then there's 2 other products you need to know about, but we'll cover those in a minute. So stage 1 is characterized by high cortisol. There's pregnenolone to support that. And then there's DHEA also. Why do we use DHEA? Because in a stage 1, the DHEA levels are low. You can use more DHEA in a stage 1 because DHEA has a lowering effect on cortisol. Okay, so that's super important. High cortisol, you can use more DHEA. With a stage 3 that has very low cortisol already, using large amounts of DHEA could drive their cortisol down more, which would be bad because that would make them feel better in the short term, but worse overall. So the higher their cortisol is, the more DHEA you can give. The lower their cortisol is, the less DHEA you want to give. And then, of course, stage 2s are kind of in between. And I'll show you some examples of that in a second. And then we use pregnenolone in different amounts for all these different phases. So let me just show you some examples, and then we'll loop back around to, okay, so here's a stage 1. This has got a high cortisol with low DHEA. So we'll use a certain amount of DHEA, a certain amount of pregnenolone for that example. And then a stage 2, or let's just go to stage 3. Stage 2s are harder to figure out. We're not going to figure that out tonight. But stage 3 is easy because the total cortisol is low and the DHEA is low. Okay, say stage 1 is high, stage 2 is dropping, stage 3 is low. And then I'll just show you some backup on this. Let's look at the actual program first, and then I'm going to do a stage 1 program first. So if you're using the DHEA in a liquid form, it would be 1 drop. If you're using it in a pill form, it would be 4 milligrams equals 1 drop. So you can do it either way with this. So with a stage, and this is again a stage 1. Remember, stage 1 is a high cortisol, stage 1. So you want to give more DHEA. How much is more? Well, I give around 4 drops, or I guess if you're going to translate that, that would be 16 milligrams. Well, let's see, 4, yeah, 3 times a day. Now that's an odd number. Obviously, you'll probably end up just giving 10 milligrams. So actually, maybe just make that easier for you guys. So you don't have to do all the math. Let's just say you get a 10 milligram DHEA. So 4 drops are 10 milligrams, 4 drops are 10 milligrams, and then 4 drops are 10 milligrams. So a couple of things about this. First of all, it's not very much DHEA, right? It's a 10 milligram dose or 4 drops, 3 times a day. The key is that you spread it out throughout the day so you never give it all at one time. If you took all that DHEA and you gave it in the morning first thing, you'll find it has a much different impact than if you spread it out in a low dose throughout the day. Spreading out in a low dose throughout the day is kind of the magic to this because it keeps the levels pretty stable and it won't cause a big bump at any one time, and it helps reduce any risk of conversion. And most importantly, it helps reduce the risk of a sudden large amount of DHEA causing a problem and interfering with DHEA production. Okay, so again, this is a stage 1. And then on the pregnenolone side, we keep the dosages pretty mellow. So that's typically going to be around 8 drops, which would be around, again, I'll do the math, I'm going to round it off for you, around 25 milligrams. So either 8 drops or 25 milligrams, again, 3 times a day. Small amount of DHEA, small amount of pregnenolone, and then your other supports, your blood sugar, adaptogenic herbs, vitamin C, and multi-pack. Okay, so that's a basic stage 1 protocol. Super simple. Now let's go back and look again at what this means, the context, contextualize this. So remember, a stage 1 was high cortisol. Sorry, there you go. Stage 1 is high cortisol and low DHEA. So we're going to use a little extra DHEA in this one to help knock down that cortisol. We're going to use a little pregnenolone to help as well. And then we'll look at a stage 3 in a second. And now if you're wondering, well, why is he saying all this stuff? Let me just show you some diagrams here. So why do we do all this in the first place? Well, when the cortisol levels are high, we find that pregnenolone helps come over and support cortisol quite nicely. Nobody uses pregnenolone. It's like there's no pregnenolone advocacy group, It's, I mean, really, I don't know, if you really twisted my arm pretty hard and were like, what's your favorite supplement of all time? It'd be somewhere between pregnenolone and transfer factor probably. But anyways, pregnenolone's right up there. It works incredibly well. Hardly anyone ever reacts to it poorly. And it's like the key thing for fixing cortisol. And pregnenolone got lost in the shuffle of supplements company marketing somewhere. No one ever talks about it. It's really the most underutilized thing on the planet. So anyways, pregnenolone is how we rectify the cortisols. And then of course, here's your DHEA. We use DHEA for that. Now, theoretically, pregnenolone should convert down to DHEA as well as over to cortisol. But when you're stressed, that doesn't happen. So typically we use pregnenolone and DHEA together. Similarly, DHEA can go down to these pathways, but it can't go back over here. So DHEA cannot help with cortisol. Pregnenolone could theoretically help with DHEA, but again, if the person's stressed out enough, the pregnenolone is going to be diverted over this way. So anyways, we use them both together. It's a wonderful combination in super low dose. Now, let's go back and I'll show you a stage 3 protocol. Hopefully this is not overwhelming or too confusing. So we did a stage 1, got that, Now let's just do one right below here and we can compare. Now we're going to do a stage 3. And don't worry, stage 2 is right in between. So remember we said stage 3, the characteristic is that the cortisol is low. So we don't want to use as much DHEA. So you can cut it down to like 2 drops or 5 milligrams. 2 drops or 5 milligrams. 2 drops or 5 milligrams. Now, why are we using such a tiny little baby amount of DHEA? Well, because DHEA can lower cortisol, so we want to be very careful about how much DHEA we give, but they still have low DHEA, so we want to get their DHEA back up. Okay, so that's a way to do it. And then on the pregnenolone side, my favorite is when people say pregnenolone. It's not pregnenolone. It's not like rigatoni. It's pregnenolone. So now with the stage 3, they're desperately low in cortisol, and so we can bring their pregnenolone levels up. So you can go 15 drops or 50 milligrams of pregnenolone in a stage 3. And I promise this works great. I've been doing this for 25 years. My teacher before me did this for 20 plus years. He's the one that taught me all this stuff. We did a study on this with the Mayo Clinic, and we showed that it was safe and effective. Nobody had any really major problems, and nothing bad happened. In fact, most of the people in the study actually got amazingly better. And not everybody, some people didn't really get better at all, but the majority of people, it was like statistically significant enough. And I think the main thing in the study, here's a copy of the study. The main thing about the research study is that we just showed that this stuff is safe, Nothing bad's going to happen if you do this. You keep these dosages super low. If you guys haven't seen this yet, I'm happy to send you a copy. This got published last year. Well, it was 2 years ago now, year and a half, 2 years ago. Evaluation of functional medicine approach to treating fatigue. Sue Cutshall and Larry Bergstrom are from the Mayo Clinic. I'm Dan Kalish. I'm the one that did all the actual patient care. The exact same protocols we used in the study are the ones that I'm talking about tonight. Nothing better, nothing less, nothing more, just the exact same stuff, okay? Pretty effective. So stage 1, more DHEA, less pregnenolone. Stage 3, less DHEA, more pregnenolone, right? And why are we doing that? Well, the way to remember that is that DHEA lowers cortisol. So if your cortisol is already low, you want to be extra careful there. And then on top of that, you can add in, of course, for the stage 3, you do the blood sugar support, you do the herbs, and you do the C. This is depending on how much stuff you want to give the person, and you can do some multi-packs. Now, remember we talked about how if the patient is like, I can't handle that, it's too much stuff, it's too expensive, just work your way down the list. You can just do DHEA and pregnenolone and blood sugar support and just stop there. You don't have to keep adding everything. But if the patient is a more is better kind of person, then keep adding things in until you really get there, okay? Let's see here. Now, that's a majority of the story. So let me just review that real quick. We can have some questions at the end too if we have time. I'm gonna just show you, sorry. Again, I loaded this up with tons of slides that we're not gonna talk about. There we go. So, that's my buddy Jim. That's not an adrenal slide. Anyways, meditation is important. Okay, so remember stage 1 is high cortisol. We use DHEA and preg, but not much DHEA. Stage 3 is low cortisol, low DHEA. We use double the pregnenolone and half the DHEA. That's the difference. Now, one final thought. You can also use specific supplements to lower cortisol and specific supplements to raise cortisol depending on the time of day when the cortisol is high or low. Okay? So let me just show you what that means here. I'm going to show you, well, actually I have it on the slides here. I can just show you here. And by the way, I just may make a comment about meditation. So it's gotten really bad for me. Used to be 2 hours. I spend like 3 to 4 hours, maybe 5 hours a day meditating, Anyways, someday we'll have to talk about that. I'll do a seminar on it sometime. But I want to say one thing about meditation is not just sitting there and spacing out. Meditation is a space, it's a time when you're spiritually connected, not disconnected. People get it backwards. You're not trying to empty your mind. You're trying to fill up your mind with better stuff. Okay, so if you ever see a high cortisol, you see these high cortisols here, you can use phosphorine to knock that high cortisol down. Incredibly effective. Every company has some phosphorine type product. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Phosphorine can be used to knock down high cortisol. Okay, so that would be for your stage 1 when the cortisol is high. And this is in addition to the other stuff that I showed you. And then for your stage 3, with the low cortisol, you can use licorice root to bring it back up. Okay. Again, I use a liquid licorice root. You can buy it in a pill if you prefer the pills. So the low cortisol states, we can specifically use licorice. The high cortisol states, we can use phosphorine. So let me just elaborate on the program real quick here. I'll show you. So if we're going to add in one more thing here, for your stage 1 with high cortisol, I'll put this in all caps, phosphorine, and you give it right before the time of high cortisol. So let's say that the high cortisol is at bedtime. You would give the phosphorine at dinner. Again, the high cortisol is at bedtime. You give the phosphorine at dinner. Similarly, for stage 3, let's say that they have low cortisol, right? That's what stage 3 is. So you can use the licorice specifically before the low cortisol. So let's say they have a low afternoon, let's say they have a low noon and afternoon cortisol. You could give the licorice root with breakfast and with lunch. Okay, so you give the cortisol boosting product, licorice root, right before whenever they're dipping down in their cortisol. And if you have a high cortisol and you want to knock it down, you give the phosphorine to knock it down. All right, so let me review all that one more time just so it sinks in, hopefully. Stage 1 is characterized by high cortisol. So we use more DHEA, less pregnenolone, all the general support, and then whenever you see a high cortisol, you give phosphorine to knock it down. Incredibly effective. It works every time if it's a, you've ruled out all the other problems. That's not a mitochondrial case. It's not a major thyroid case. They don't have an alcoholic husband or whatever it is. So at this point in my career, I'm more interested in when these programs don't work, because when these programs don't work, I know there's something going on that's be interesting to me personally. That's how effective they are. Okay, if you're in a stage 3 and you're plagued by low cortisol, we're going to drop the DHEA down to 5 milligrams. Remember, you can't give it all at the same time. If you give 15 milligrams all at the same time, it has a completely different effect. Same story I always tell the patients. If you decided drinking water was the best thing you could do for your health, which I do believe it probably is one of the best things you do for your health, if you all of a sudden drank all the water that you needed for the entire day at one time, your stomach would just blow up and you wouldn't feel very good, right? The spread, and that doesn't mean water is bad for you. So if you take a large amount of DHEA at one time, 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams, 200, whatever people do, that could cause a lot of problems. If you take 5 milligrams 3 times a day, we're trying to mimic a normal level in your system from the DHEA that's missing, and just giving you these small amounts pulsed in throughout the day. It's the pulsing it in part that makes the big difference with this. Same with the pregnenolone. We're just giving a small amount of the pregnenolone spread throughout the day. And again, the drops seem to work a lot better. Just so you know, the drops that I use, I forgot to mention this, are 1.2 milligrams per drop of DHEA, and similarly, 1.2 milligrams per drop of preg. But the drops are absorbed so well that you have to do this little factor when you want to account for if you're going to use pills. Okay, so again, stage 1, characterized by more DHEA and less pregnenolone, and the phosphorine is the extra special guest there. Then stage 3, less DHEA by half, double the pregnenolone, the same basic support agents here, and you can use the licorice root when you have the super low cortisols, right? So now, Let's see. That is the fundamental lesson here. I'm going to mention, let me see here. We'll talk about the training program for a second, and I want to show you guys some more examples. So we can just go through some samples here so you can see. Because once you see this 10 or 20 times, you should be able to figure it out. All right. So here's some sample tests. Let's just pick one here. So now we're looking at the total cortisol. It's at a 9, which is low. The DHEA is a 0.1, which is very low. This would be a stage 3. You would use the licorice root at breakfast and lunch to bring up these lows. You don't ever want to use licorice root at dinner time because it can stimulate people at night. And remember, we would use the pregnenolone and DHEA in a stage 3. So that would look exactly like this. Stage 3 protocol, either the drops, that would be 2 drops, 3 times a day. I mean, in the liquid form, that's like 2 milligrams 3 times a day, right? It's not very much. As a matter of fact, they don't even sell 2 milligram pills, right? So this is like a lower dose than anyone ever anticipated using in the history of functional medicine. It's a super low dose. And then on 15 here, 15 drops. Okay. Or you can go up to as much as 50 on the pregnenolone. All right. And then because it's a stage 3, you would also use the licorice root extract, in this case with breakfast and lunch, but don't do it with dinner because it can keep people awake at night. All right. And then the generic support that we put in every program, blood sugar, herbs, vitamin C, and then the multi-packs. So that's one example. And let's see here, let me pull up another one. It's just another extreme. Let's see here. Hang on one sec, sorry, here we go. I had this, here we go. This could be a good one. So total cortisol is 12, and the DHEA is 2, which we would still consider low, kind of functionally low. And in order to rectify that, you go right back to the exact same program, right? It's not going to change a whole lot. It's pretty similar. That's the beauty of having a system. Now let's look at some high cortisols. Here's an example here. Total cortisol is 68, but the DHEA is low, down at a 1. So this is what we call a stage 1. High cortisol, low DHEA. So we cut over to our stage 1 protocol, which is hiding here, hasn't changed in the last 10 minutes. Here we go. Remember, more DHEA, 4 drops or 10 milligrams, 3 times a day. Remember, the key point is it's spread throughout the day. So you're not going to get a sudden spike. Shouldn't get much in the way of negative side effects from doing that. And then pregnenolone is in a lower amount, 25 milligrams 3 times a day, or if you're using the liquid, 8 drops. Remember, I prefer the liquid very much so, and the liquid is 1.2 milligrams per drop. So this is like, really it's, I don't know, about 4. It's a little bit more than 4 milligrams of the liquid. Okay. So super low dose, 10 milligrams of a capsule. And then the other characteristic or sort of special thing about this stuff here, let me show you here. Where'd it go here? Sorry. Too many windows open. Here we go. Remember, if you have a super high cortisol, let's find another stage 1. Oh, there's a good one. All right. So high cortisol in the morning, noon, night, and bedtime. Total cortisol is high. Okay. You're surging with that much cortisol. You want to slow the train down, right? And we can use the phosphorine to lower high cortisol. And so in that case I just showed you, they had high cortisol all the time. So you could give the phosphorine literally, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, maybe even before bed if you wanted to knock their cortisol down. In general, my experience has been that foscarine works, within a month or two. Within a bottle or two, cortisol is down. So you don't have to do that for very long. It usually works pretty quickly. Most of these protocols I set up for 6 months. So it'd be a 6-month program typically. Stage 1, 6-month program. Stage 3, 6-month program. I usually find it's not a whole lot in a person's life is going to completely change in a month or two. And so it's worth pushing them to do a 6-month program. In my clinic, we try to sell either 3 or 6-month supplies of all these products so the person gets on the right track and does the right thing, from the very beginning, from the get-go, right? So now, let me do a little marketing self-promotional thing, and then I'll look at questions that came in, okay? But by the way, you guys, that's everything that I do with the adrenals. I mean, I built my whole career around this in the earlier years of my practice, and again, if you're selecting people in the right way, I can show you maybe some advice about who not to do this with. You're going to have really great responses from people in general. If you're addressing the underlying stressor at the same time. Okay. So as a repeat, we have a new class that's starting in a month or so. I completely revamped it and I built a whole new section, which is what I call the fundamentals of functional medicine. I don't know, something like 20 hours of content of how to design programs and how to explain all this stuff to patients. Because what I found in all these years of doing this is that where I had this 5 or 6 year period of watching Glenn Frieder work every day, and just through osmosis, I never went to a program design class. I never went to a patient communication class. I just watched Glenn year after year, patient after patient. And I watched Dr. Timmons too, year after year, patient after patient. I just learned this by observation. And now I realize that a lot of the practitioners that are, in functional medicine never had a 5 or 6 year period of just watching two masters do this work. So I built a class about it where I'm trying to teach everything that I've learned about program design and patient interaction. And this seems to be one of the key things that's missing. And I can tell that because when new students come into the mentorship, something that they don't always have down, they're not totally confident with how to explain stuff to patients. And they're a little shaky on their program design skills. So I just want to kind of do a crash course in that and teach you all how to do that quickly. And for those that are new to functional medicine, it's an absolute necessity. It's also probably the most important part of driving the business and driving referrals. So anyways, I built this whole new section. It's called Fundamentals of Functional Medicine. It's included with the 1-year mentorship. We didn't change the pricing at all. The mentorship is the same price. You get $1,000 off the class if you enter that code there, okay? And we're starting a new group in April. Also, the new class has got all of, every live Q&A call we're reviewing. I'm really looking at things fundamentally in a different way, not just more about program design, but also about what Richard Lord has taught me on the actual lab interpretation stuff. And I can't tell you, like, there's something happening in my life now, which is not about for my personal gain. Like when someone like Richard Lord comes to you and says, hey kid, I want to teach you everything I know and I want you to have all my intellectual property to carry on when I'm dead, that's more like an obligation than it is a financial opportunity. And I'm in it now. I'm in the deepest end of the pool now with the best people. And my job is to try to carry this on for you. Someone just asked how much is the class. Let me just show you here. 1-year mentorship. Let's see. I don't want to say the price wrong because I'll get in a lot of trouble. My staff will just like shoot me. Okay, it's $13,490 for a year program, or you can do 12 monthly payments of $1,235. And if you use that code that I just had, you get $1,000 off. You get $1,000 off, so it makes it $12,500 basically for a year of the most intense content. You get a year of me yelling at you every week. We do live calls. We have thousands of case studies. We have this curriculum that's just out of this world. And now we have, the mind-numbing expertise of Richard Lord coming in and sort of me channeling his work, basically. So you guys, this isn't available anywhere else. Some of the senior doctors understand this. Those of you on the call might not. You just can't walk into somewhere and just have all this content thrown at you. It's really hard to find, all right? So let me see here. I want to show you one other thing, and I queued it up. So these are the cases you want to be on the lookout for. Let's just show you on the organic acids what to look out for in terms of adrenal labs. So if you see an organic acids test and you see all these low markers here, all these low markers under fat metabolism, carb metabolism, energy production, and if you for most people that are this screwed up, if you go to the next page, you'll see it carries over. Look at all the B vitamin markers too. See all these that are low? DL means underneath detected limit. Those people don't respond well to adrenal programs. Okay, so if you get someone who's got a total wipeout here of their mitochondrial markers on organic acids, be careful. They're not going to respond really well to an adrenal program. And believe me, I learned this the hard way over the course of a decade. So if you're running organic acids, you can spot who your adrenal failures are before you treat them. And what would you do? Well, you would put them on a mitochondrial program first. You'll get the mitochondria working and then consider working with your adrenals later. And as I mentioned earlier, if they have a primary thyroid problem, this isn't going to work that great either. So be on the lookout for those two areas that could interfere. If you're not running organic acids, then just try the adrenal program and just hope that it works. If you're running organic acids, you can spot these folks ahead of time. Okay. So let us look at questions. Oh, Teresa just asked a question. For a new client, you could only do one test. Would it be the adrenal test or organic acids? I'd do organic acids. Knowing what I know now about organic acids, because you can tell from organic acids you can't tell adrenal function, but you can tell adrenal status. So this is for Teresa's question. So if you look at these markers on organic acids, that's adrenaline and noradrenaline here, or epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? So you're getting a glimpse at the adrenals and also at dopamine. But yeah, if you could only run one test, I think organic acids would be better. And yeah, the ion panel from Victoria, absolutely. The ion 20 is fine if cost is an issue. The ion 20 is what Richard and I are working on now. So for those of you that don't know, the ion panel is sort of the Cadillac of all functional medicine tests. Dr. Lord developed it over the course of many years. It includes fatty acids, amino acids, an organics profile, heavy metals, all these other markers, and it's really quite complex, extremely complex and interesting test. Let me see, I'm just looking at other questions here that came in from earlier. Let's see, if cortisol curve is okay, but pregnenolone is super low, then you can still do the program, yes. Yeah, so we usually post a PDF of the slides, not the actual slides themselves. So that should be somewhere when we're done with this. 30 milligrams of DHA seems like a lot. If you have, this can go bad. If you have to screen people, you don't want to give it to somebody. You have to kind of watch people, and some people might have side effects. It's not completely, totally stress-free. Let's see. When client is taking testosterone, should DHEA and pregnenolone not be used? No, I think it's fine. In these dosages that we're talking about, I've never seen a problem. I think you'd be okay on that. Oh, about there's new reference ranges on the labs. So if the DHEA is below a 6 or 7, then I usually treat it. Okay, if it's below a 6 or 7, then I usually treat it. Let's see. Oh, multi-pack. Multi-pack's just like a multivitamin and mineral thing with some fish oils, etc. Let's see here. Someone asked about low cortisol and high DHEA. That's complicated. Let's see. Kelly's asking about EMF exposure. So for some people that are super sensitive, EMF exposure could be enough. of a problem, but you have to be super energetically sensitive. Then someone asked about vitamin C. So vitamin C is 2,000 milligrams to 5,000 milligrams per day, total per day, divided up. So usually it would be like, maybe typical would be 1,000 milligrams here, 1,000 here. And some people get loose stool from vitamin C, so be careful if you use too much of it. Let's see, Audra is asking, what do you do when overall cortisol is 21, low DHEA, but morning cortisol is low? Noon high, and evening and night normal. That's a stage 3, so you could still use the stage 3 protocol, but you would do forget the licorice and that stuff necessarily. You can use them all. I can show you how to mix and match that. Should I show you? Because that's a complicated question. In other words, you can use licorice and phosphorine at the same time. Let's say the patient has a high nighttime cortisol. You can give the phosphorine before they, at dinner. And let's say that same patient has a low noontime cortisol. You could give the licorice root in the morning. So let me show you that, because that was just what I said was complicated. So let's say that they have, I'm going to write it out here, high nighttime, low noon on the cortisol. Then you would give the licorice root in the morning to boost up that noon, and you would give the phosphorine at dinner time to knock down the evening. So you can use them both. Licorice to bring up, phosphorine to bring down. You can use them in the same patient even. What do you do if the cortisol sum is within the reference range, but cortisol is low first thing in the morning? Yeah, you could use the licorice in the morning and the phosphorine at night. And in order to use this whole protocol, you need to have DHEA that's either low or borderline low. So if your cortisol and DHEA are both in the normal range, but just bouncing around, then you just reset the rhythm, but you don't necessarily have to use the actual hormones to do that. Let's see, Edit is asking, if someone comes to you already on pregnenolone DHEA, how long do they need to be off them before you test it? 3 days. You can do longer, but 3 days is enough. Let's see. Paula is asking, what about your organic acids only class? Oh my gosh, this is a great class too, you guys. Thanks for asking, Paul. I appreciate it. How much does that cost? I don't know. Let's look it up together as a group so I don't screw up. 6 months organic acids, $49.95. Man, that is way underpriced, you guys. It's like a 6-month class on the hardest lab out there. And I'm really, by the end of that, you're going to understand. 60–70% of my practice is organic acids now. I mean, you really got to master organic acids, and no one else is teaching it, not at the level that I am. And I'm not saying that to be boastful or to make money. It's just simple truth. No one else is really doing this. Just look around. It's a really, really complicated test. And you can't just look at it and give somebody some B vitamins and magnesium and think that things are going to get better, okay? You really want to learn how to interpret it. That's a really great deal, okay, Paula? If you're thinking about it, you should sign up because you'll get a ton out of that. If you're a successful practitioner, within 3 or 4 months of taking one of my classes, you should have made the money back. That's kind of the whole point of doing this. Let me see. Anne has a question. How to do tests so many times a day? The test is 4 saliva samples, 3 times a day. Oh, how much licorice? Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So I use the licorice drops. So let me show you. I think Meg asked this question. I use licorice drops, and I get them from a company called Biomatrix. And I'll use the liquid form, and I don't know how this translates into capsule milligrams, but I'll use 10 drops per dose of the liquid per dose, 10 drops per dose. Again, that's Biomatrix is the name of the company. So you could look that up online probably and see what the strength of that is. What would you recommend for someone who gets to sleep at night but wakes up throughout the night? If you test their melatonin, they may have a melatonin problem, and there's time-release melatonin that works well for that. Or sometimes we'll use tryptophan. Oh, see, Teresa said, I'm in organic acids class already. How much is just the fundamental medicine functional, the functional medicine foundations part? Teresa, email the office and ask them that because I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'll get in trouble. They'll yell at me. So, uh, but just email the office and Larissa is the boss. And as we say at my office, Larissa is the boss. I'm the owner, but I don't really run things anymore. I have people smarter than me that do that. And if you haven't talked to Larissa, she's wicked smart. Uh, if we do the mentorship class, we need to do the organic testing. Or yeah, so the mentorship, the year-long mentorship includes everything that we're talking about. It includes the fundamentals of functional medicine, includes everything about organic acids, all the stuff on the hormones. It's the whole kit and caboodle, right? It's everything that we have. Um, main adrenal lab. I like to use biohealth. This is just an emotional loyalty issue because my teacher, Dr. Timmons, started the lab. Let me show you. There are other companies that are just as accurate as they are. Here they are, Biohealth Laboratory. Again, he was like literally like a father to me. In some ways, I was closer to him than my dad, and at certain times in my life. Anyway, so I love Biohealth. There are other wonderful salivary labs out there, so that's certainly not the only one. Um, let's see. And I'm open if you got, there's people, we have a lot of people in the class right now from New Zealand and Australia. They use a whole different set of lab companies. As long as you're getting accurate results, it's fine. All right, I think we're done. I thought, let me see, adrenal lab in the mentorship class. So Edit was asking more about the mentorship class. Let me just show you guys, since some of you are interested. I'm glad to hear that. There's a whole. So the actual mentorship 1 year, there's a 6-month version of the mentorship too. It's cheaper, but it's not quite as good. So you go to the website, you can click around, you can read about what's in here, but it includes the organic acids testing. It includes all the things to do with adrenal hormones and gut related stuff. There's a live call once a week. We go over all your labs. There's tons and tons of case studies. There's thousands of case studies and online community you learn from. It's pretty much like a functional medicine ecosystem that I built here. You also get super connected with the other people and motivated to push yourself forward, okay, and make sure that all this stuff works. All right. Now, I think I got through most of the questions. I'm sorry we're out of time now. If you have let's see, here's one from Edge. Let me just ask this one, last one. If you have a burning question that I didn't get to answer, feel free to just email the office. Biomatrix makes the drops that I use for the drops. There are other companies that make it. Again, I just use Biomatrix because I've been using them for a million years. If you want to use the liquids work a little bit better than the pills. If you've been using the pills and you never tried the liquids, try 5 or 10 patients on the liquids. I think you'll notice that there's a big difference. Hey, you guys, thanks for participating. We're up at our hour. Email the office if you're curious. If you're even contemplating the mentorship, more power to you. That's the whole point of us being here, is to get you all trained in all these complicated areas. And I do believe we have a good thing going here. Class starts in about a month, and I'd be super happy to talk with you, or Mark Herbert, who does a lot of consults for us, can talk to you as well. If you're interested in the class, just get in touch. We'll reach out. Okay, have a good rest of your evening. Catch up with you soon.